As a medical examiner, my reports are supposed to be documents of cold, hard facts. They're the final objective summary of how a life ended. We deal in mechanism and manner, in toxicology and trauma. It's a world of scientific certainty, of puzzles solved on a stainless steel table. But one case that crossed my desk in San Francisco had an official cause of death that read more like a script from a bizarre, dark tragedy. It involved a historic nightclub, a legendary stage prop, and a couple who, in their final moments, accidentally set the scene for one of the weirdest deaths I've ever seen. Now, today's story might seem like a tragic accident at first glance. I promise you it's so much more than that. To really get this case, you have to understand the city where it happened. San Francisco is a city of ghosts and legends, a place where the past isn't just remembered, it feels like it's still breathing. From the foggy alleys of Chinatown to the faded grandeur of Haight-Ashbury, every corner has a story. In my world, a city's personality really shapes the kinds of cases you see. And in a place like San Francisco, a city that has always celebrated the eccentric, the revolutionary, and the downright strange, you learn to expect the unexpected. You see things that defy any simple explanation. Cases that just stick with you long after the paperwork is filed. I've been a medical examiner for a long time. I've seen deaths that were heartbreaking, deaths that were infuriating, and deaths that were just profoundly senseless. But only a handful of times have I seen a case so bizarre, so mechanically precise in how it killed, that it became the stuff of legend around the coroner's office. It's a story whispered from seasoned pathologists to wide-eyed interns, a cautionary tale about how the most ordinary objects can become instruments of death, and how a stage built for spectacle can deliver the most horrific finale you could imagine. This isn't just a story about a strange death. It's about a specific time and place, about a piece of cultural history that took on a life of its own. It's about passion, machinery, and sheer dumb luck all colliding. To get to the truth of what happened that night, we have to go back. We have to step inside a place that was, for decades, the epicenter of San Francisco's unique brand of rebellious glamour, the Condor Club. To truly grasp how strange this case is, you need to understand the stage it was set on. I mean that literally. The Condor Club, sitting at the corner of Broadway and Columbus in the city's electric North Beach district, wasn't just some nightclub. It was an institution, a landmark of San Francisco's libertine spirit. In 1964, it cemented its place in history by becoming the first fully topless nightclub in America. The woman at the center of it all was a dancer named Carol Doda. Carol Doda wasn't just a performer, she was a phenomenon. She was a cocktail waitress who became a cultural icon when one night in 1964, she wore a Rudy Gernrich-designed monokeen and changed American nightlife forever. Her act was theatrical, it was bold, and it was pure San Francisco. It wasn't just what she did, it was how she did it. And her grand entrance was the stuff of legend. The centerpiece of her act was a gleaming white baby grand piano. But this was no ordinary piano. It was a marvel of stagecraft. At the start of her show, this piano, with Doda dancing on top, would be slowly lowered from a custom-cut hole in the ceiling by a powerful hydraulic lift. Just imagine it. The lights are low. The music swells, and down from the heavens of the club descends a piano, carrying the woman who was busy redefining entertainment. It was dramatic, risk, and totally unforgettable. That piano wasn't just a prop. It was a character in the Condor Club's story. Outside, a huge neon sign of Doda, complete with flashing red lights for nipples, announced the club's audacious vibe to the world. Inside, the piano was the altar where North Beach worshipped. Doda and her piano became symbols of the city's sexual revolution. A story that was profiled by Tom Wolfe and even captured in film. She performed there for over 2 decades, and while her act evolved, it always revolved around that iconic instrument. Over the years, the club changed hands and identities, at times becoming a sports bar or a seafood restaurant. But it always seemed to be pulled back by the gravity of its own history. Today it's branded as San Francisco's original gentleman's club, a nod to its revolutionary past. The Condor Club was even added to the San Francisco Legacy Business Registry, officially recognizing its importance to the city's culture. But like a lot of places that burn that brightly, the Condor Club had its shadows. It's the very machine that created so much spectacle, the hydraulic lift that gave Carol Dota her goddess-like entrance, held a dark and unforeseen potential. The opening in the ceiling was cut with precision to fit the piano perfectly, leaving almost zero clearance. It was a piece of engineering that did its job flawlessly, night after night. No one ever stopped to ask what would happen if the piano went up instead of down, especially if something or someone was in the way. The stage was set for a tragedy. Players just hadn't arrived yet. The story of how this celebrated piece of stagecraft became a killing machine involves two people whose names are now forever linked to the club's dark legend, James Ferrozzo and Teresa Hill. It all went down in November of 1983. The exact date was November 23rd, the night before Thanksgiving. Things were quiet at the Condor Club. The last of the patrons had stumbled out into the cool North Beach air. The music was off, and the staff were closing up. That electric energy from the performances was gone, leaving behind the stale smell of smoke and spilled drinks and emptiness that always feels a little sad in a place built for noise and crowds. Among the last people inside were James Ferrozzo and his girlfriend, Teresa Hill. James, known to his friends as Jimmy the Beard, was 40 years old and worked at the club. Depending on who you ask, he was a bouncer, an assistant manager, or just a longtime employee, a familiar face. He was part of the place. Teresa was much younger, only 23, and was described as an exotic dancer herself. They'd reportedly only been dating for a couple of weeks. We can only guess what led to their fateful choice. Maybe it was the intoxicating quiet of the empty club, the allure of being alone in a place usually buzzing with people. Maybe it was the thrill of doing something forbidden, a feeling of owning the space for a few stolen hours. Or maybe it was just a spontaneous, passionate impulse. They decided to have sex, and they chose a spot that was both iconic and, as it turned out, lethally dangerous. On top of the slick, spangled lid of Carol Dota's famous white piano dot in there. Minds, it must have seemed like a thrilling, almost romantic thing to do. To be intimate on the very prop that launched a cultural revolution in the middle of the night. In the heart of North Beach, the piano sat there silently on the stage, a ghost of shows gone by. They climbed onto its curved surface, alone in the cavernous room. What happened next wasn't malicious, and it wasn't a mechanical failure. It was a tragic freak accident. In the middle of their passion, one of them police figured it was likely James accidentally hit the switch that controlled the piano's hydraulic lift. The switch was on a nearby wall, easy to bump in the dark. For a moment, they probably didn't notice a thing. The hydraulic system was built for smooth, dramatic entrances, not sudden jolts. It was slow. A low hum would have started to fill the silent club, the first sign that something was very wrong. Then, an almost imperceptible upward movement. The piano, with the couple tangled up on its lid, began its slow, steady climb toward the ceiling. It takes about 90 seconds for the piano to travel. It's 15 feet from the stage to the ceiling. 90 seconds. That's an eternity when you realize you've made a fatal mistake. In that minute and a half, their playful, passionate adventure turned into a slow-motion nightmare. The initial confusion must have given way to dawning horror. The piano wasn't stopping. The ceiling, with its custom-cut opening, was getting closer and closer. The space was shrinking. Panic had to have set in. They were trapped on a rising platform with no way down and no way to stop it. They were ascending directly into a space that had no room for them. In the final seconds, as the ornate lid of the piano met the unforgiving ceiling, there must have been a desperate scramble. Teresa Hill, being smaller and lighter, managed to survive. She was able to get into a position where James's body partially shielded her from the immense pressure. She was pinned, but she was alive. James Ferrozzo wasn't so lucky. The full, relentless force of the hydraulic lift pressed him between the several hundred-pound piano and the structural beams of the ceiling. The machine, doing its job exactly as designed, crushed him. The very device that symbolized the club's playful glamour had become an instrument of pure mechanical death. The humming stopped, and then there was only silence. The scene stayed frozen like that for hours. A horrific tableau suspended 15 feet above the stage. Teresa Hill was pinned under James's body, trapped in the dark, silent club, with the weight of the man who had just died pressing down on her. She screamed, but there was no one there to hear. The minutes stretched into an eternity of pain, fear, and grief. It wasn't until 7:30 the next morning, Thanksgiving morning, that help finally arrived. Angel Vicente, the club's janitor, walked in to start his shift and was met with a sight that made no sense. High above the stage, where it absolutely should not have been, was the white baby grand piano, pressed firmly into its slot in the ceiling, and from underneath it, he could just make out the shapes of two people, pinned and motionless. He immediately called the police. When first responders got there, they were faced with a situation there's just no training manual for. The couple was trapped. Getting them out was a delicate and horrifying task. Firefighters couldn't free them right away. It took hours, a complex operation of securing the piano and then carefully lowering it. It wasn't until about 10:15 a.m. that they were finally able to bring them down. By then, James Ferrozzo had been dead for hours. Teresa Hill, miraculously, was alive, though suffering from bruises and, as you can imagine, profound psychological trauma, and this is where I come in. A call comes into the medical examiner's office, a 40-year-old male, deceased at a North Beach nightclub. The initial details are always a little sparse, often strange, but this one was in a league of its own. Crushed by a piano isn't a phrase you hear every day, even in my line of work. Arriving at the Condor Club was surreal. This place I knew by reputation was now a swarm of official activity: police, firefighters, paramedics. Inside, the club's festive, gaudy decor clashed grimly with what had happened. All eyes were on the stage and the famous white piano, which now sat silently, looking like an object of menace. Detectives noted that Teresa had cuts on her hands, likely from a desperate struggle in those final moments. My job is to speak for the dead, to piece together their last moments using the language of science. That investigation starts at the scene. I looked at the piano's position, the hydraulic lift's controls, and that small, unforgiving space in the ceiling. The environment itself tells you a story. Here the story was about a perfectly designed machine that worked without a single error. There was no malfunction. The piano had simply been turned on. We transported James's body to the morgue. This is where the real work of figuring out the cause of death begins, away from the chaos of the scene and in the controlled clinical environment of the autopsy suite. The external exam is the first step. We document every single injury. In this case, the external signs were overwhelming. The trauma was massive, consistent with a tremendous compressive force on his torso. But to be sure, to put a name to what killed him, I had to look inside. The internal exam is a systematic process where you check each organ system for injury. In James Ferrozzo's case, the findings were immediate and catastrophic. His ribcage was shattered. His internal organs, especially his heart and lungs, had suffered massive damage from the compression. But the key finding, the ultimate cause of his death, was asphyxia. Specifically, blunt force traumatic asphyxia. This happens when a heavy weight crushes the chest and abdomen, making it physically impossible to breathe. The victim can't expand their lungs. It's a terrifyingly quick, but not instantaneous way to die. The pressure not only stops air from getting in, but also blocks blood from returning to the heart. The result is a rapid loss of consciousness, then death. The evidence was classic: the crushing chest injuries, the signs of oxygen deprivation in his tissues, and the telltale petechial hemorrhages and broken blood vessels in his eyes and on his face, caused by the sudden intense spike in pressure. The toxicology reports came back, and just as police suspected, alcohol was a factor. Teresa Hill later told authorities she was too drunk to remember exactly how it all happened. But alcohol didn't kill him. It just contributed to the series of bad decisions that led him onto that piano. The pieces were all there. The scene told me what happened, the piano went up. The autopsy told me how he died, crushing and asphyxiation. and Teresa's hazy testimony filled in the why a spontaneous tragic accident. There was no foul play, no hidden culprit. The killer was the machine itself, activated by its own victims. The final report was written, with the facts laid out in cold clinical terms. Manner of death, accident. Cause of death, blunt force traumatic asphyxia due to mechanical compression. But those sterile words don't even begin to capture the sheer bizarreness of it. A man, in a moment of passion, killed by a piece of stage equipment famous for its playful theatrics. It was a perfect and perfectly horrible. The storm of bad luck, bad timing, and bad judgment. This story is a stark reminder of how fast a situation can turn from joyful to fatal, and how hidden dangers can be lurking in the most unexpected places. The mechanics of this are just so unique and so chilling. Before we get into the aftermath and how this became a San Francisco urban legend, I want to ask you all something. What is the most unusual or seemingly harmless object you've ever heard of causing a serious accident? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you find these kinds of deep dives into strange medical cases fascinating, please consider liking this video and subscribing. It really helps us keep bringing you these stories. In the days after, the story of the killer piano was a sensation. The San Francisco Chronicle ran a front-page story with a headline that captured everyone's morbid curiosity. Man dies on the ceiling at Condor. It was a tale too strange not to be true. A bizarre footnote in the city's already colorful history. For the police and my office, the case was closed. It was a tragic accident. But for the city, and especially for those of us in the forensics community, it was the start of a legend. Teresa Hill survived, but her life was changed forever. She had not only lost her partner in the most traumatic way possible, but she'd been physically pinned to him for hours after he died. The psychological scars from that night are impossible for most of us to even imagine. After being treated for her physical injuries, she faded from the public eye. The survivor of one of the most bizarre accidents in the city's history, the Condor Club itself became an even bigger point of interest. The piano, once a symbol of liberation and fun, now had this dark legacy. It was both a tourist attraction and a weird sort of memorial. For years, people would come to the club not just for the show, but to see the infamous piano, to look up at the ceiling, to try and wrap their heads around the horror of that night. It stayed there on the stage, a silent white elephant, a testament to its dual history of spectacle and tragedy. Carol Doda, who was forever linked to the piano, kept performing, but the incident cast a long shadow. She left the club in 1985, a couple of years after the accident, and moved on to other things like owning a lingerie shop and singing in a rock band. But her name and her signature prop were now tied to this tragic story. When she passed away in 2015, nearly every obituary that recounted her revolutionary career also mentioned the bizarre 1983 death of James Ferrozzo, forever intertwining her legacy with his, inside the San Francisco Medical Examiner's office. The case of Jimmy the Beard became one of those stories. It's a teaching tool and a legendary tale. In a job where you're constantly exposed to the worst of humanity and the cruelest twists of fate, certain cases just stand out. They become benchmarks for the unusual. We tell the story to newcomers as a way of saying, "You think you've seen it all? You haven't." It was a perfect example of why you have to approach every scene with an open mind, because sometimes the most outlandish explanation is the right one. It highlights a core principle of forensic investigation. The environment is just as crucial as the body. The story wasn't just in James Ferrozzo's crushed chest. It was in the hydraulic schematics of the piano lift, the placement of that switch on the wall, and the exact dimensions of the opening in the ceiling. It was a death that could only have happened in that specific place with that specific machine. Under those specific circumstances, the story serves as a morbidly fascinating cautionary tale. It says a lot about the hidden dangers in our mechanized world and the razor-thin line between safety and disaster. The piano lift wasn't faulty. It worked perfectly. It was human-era momentary lapse in judgment that turned a piece of entertainment hardware into a fatal press. It's a reminder that even in our most unguarded moments, the unforgiving laws of physics and mechanics are always there. The case of James Ferrozzo is more than just a weird death. It's a story that perfectly captures a specific era of San Francisco, an era of excess, rebellion, and theatricality. It's a tragedy that was born from the very things that made the Condor Club famous. The glamour, the machinery, the rule-breaking spirit, it all came together on that Thanksgiving Eve into a single, fatal event. As a medical examiner, I'm tasked with finding the truth in death. And the truth here was that this was a pure, unadulterated accident. There was no villain, only victims. A victim of catastrophic physical trauma and a victim of unimaginable psychological trauma. The white baby grand piano doesn't make its grand descent at the Condor Club anymore. It remains an artifact, a piece of history. But its legacy is now twofold. It's remembered as the Stage 4 Carol Doda's revolutionary act that changed American culture, and as the silent mechanical accomplice in one of the most bizarre and tragic deaths the city has ever seen. It stands as a powerful testament to the idea that sometimes the strangest stories are the truest ones. And in a city of legends like San Francisco, even the medical examiner's files can hold a ghost story or two. Thank you for joining me for this look at an incredible case. If you have any thoughts or questions, please leave them in the comments below. I try my best to read through as many as I can. Stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one.